Welcome in. Today we're breaking down a really serious topic. Arizona's Aggravated Assault Law, also known as ARS 13-1204. We're going to unpack what it is, what makes it so different from a simple assault, and why the consequences are so incredibly severe. All right, before we dive in, a really important heads up. What we're talking about today is for educational purposes, okay? It is absolutely not a substitute for real legal advice. If you or anyone you know is facing criminal charges, the first thing you should do is speak with an experienced attorney. Here's how we're going to break it all down for you. We'll start with the core difference between simple and aggravated assault, then get into the key factors that trigger the charge, define the offense, look at the serious consequences, and finally answer some common questions. So let's just kick things off with the big question, right? What is that line? What actually pushes a simple assault, which is a misdemeanor, over the edge into a felony aggravated assault? Where exactly does the law draw that line in the sand? Well, the answer really comes down to something the law calls aggravating factors. These are very specific circumstances that take a bad situation and make it, in the eyes of the law, much, much worse. Okay, so let's put these side by side. The difference is just huge. A simple assault, that's a misdemeanor. But the second, and I mean the second, just one of those legal aggravating factors shows up, it becomes an aggravated assault, and that is always a felony. The penalties just explode from there. So that begs the question, what are these legal triggers? What are these aggravating factors that can completely change the game? Now, the law has a whole list, but they pretty much boil down to a few major categories. We're talking about things like how bad the injury was, whether a weapon was used, who the victim was, and even where the assault happened. First up, the injury itself. And believe me, there's a world of difference in the eyes of the law between a simple injury and what they call a serious physical injury. We're not talking about a cut or a bruise here. The law defines this very clearly as an injury that's potentially life-threatening or causes permanent, life-altering damage. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The law makes this super specific distinction between a deadly weapon and a dangerous instrument. A deadly weapon is obvious, right? It's designed to be lethal, like a gun. But a dangerous instrument? That can be almost anything. A baseball bat, a rock, a broken bottle, even a car. It's all about how that object is used. The context is everything. Another huge factor is who the victim is. The law basically puts a protective bubble around certain professionals. If you assault someone like a police officer, a paramedic, a teacher, or a nurse while they're on the job, it's automatically an aggravating factor. The law recognizes the service they provide and gives them extra protection. All right, so it's not just about what you did. It's also about what was going on in your head at the time. The law looks very closely at the accused's mental states, and we need to understand three key terms: intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly. First up, intentionally. This one's pretty much what it sounds like. It means you had a specific goal in mind, plain and simple, you meant to do it, period. Knowingly is a little different. It's not necessarily that you wanted the final outcome, but you were fully aware of what you were doing. You knew your actions could lead to a certain result, even if that wasn't your primary goal. And then we have recklessly. Now, you really got to pay attention to this one because it's a game changer. This means you didn't have to intend to hurt anyone at all. You just had to be aware of a major, unjustifiable risk, and you ignored it. Think about someone driving 100 miles per hour through a neighborhood. That's a perfect example of reckless behavior. Okay, so this is where the rubber really meets the road. Let's talk about the consequences of a conviction, because the stakes here are incredibly high. And I mean, just look at this table. The penalties they're staggering. We're talking years, sometimes decades in prison, all depending on the specific circumstances. And for many of these more serious felonies, probation isn't even on the table. And get this isn't something that just disappears after a few months. The state has 7 years to bring these felony charges. It's a very long window. All right, let's wrap up by tackling a couple of really common questions that always seem to come up when we talk about this, and they tie everything together nicely. Okay, first big question, what if it was just an accident? If you didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, can you still be charged with aggravated assault? And the answer, you guessed it, goes right back to that word recklessly. Even if you call it an accident, that's not automatically a defense. If the prosecution can show that your actions created a huge, unjustifiable risk that any reasonable person would have avoided, that charge can absolutely stick. And another huge one, what about self-defense? What if I was just protecting myself from being attacked? Now, self-defense is absolutely a valid defense in Arizona. But, and this is a huge but, the force you use has to be seen as reasonable and immediately necessary for that specific situation. If a court finds that the force you used was excessive, that self-defense claim can fall apart. So we've looked at the law, the factors, and the truly serious consequences, which leaves us with one final and maybe the most important question to think about, especially for anyone who might find themselves in this kind of situation. Look, the bottom line is this. An aggravated assault charge is no small thing. It is an incredibly serious felony that can change your entire life. Understanding what the charge actually means is a critical first step, but it really underscores just how important it is to treat the situation with the absolute seriousness it deserves.